Between 2017 and 2019, I worked as a municipal park ranger in a city outside Phoenix, Arizona. One of the parks I patrolled was a 20-something acre historical farm. The park is beautiful with buildings dating back to the late 19th century. The oldest building on property was built, I believe, in the 1870s. Me being a believer in the paranormal, I had asked a few of the other rangers if anything strange ever happened there. They all said no and would dismiss the notion of it being haunted. I had been working for about 3 months when the city started experiencing a rash of break-ins at the ranch. The ongoing vandalism prompted the park department to assign us park rangers there overnight as a deterrent and to try and catch whoever was trespassing. The first few shifts went by with nothing happening. Then one night, I got the answer to the questions I'd been asking about the ranch being haunted. I had parked my patrol truck back in a small grove of trees next to a gate. The fence along the trees is one area that I felt the vandals were using to get into the park. It was about 1 o'clock and I was filling out my shift log. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a glow in the windshield. I first thought it was my phone screen lighting up, but when I checked, it was still black. Thinking then that it was a police officer checking the perimeter with their flashlight, I looked in my rearview mirror. Again, that wasn't the cause of the glow. I then looked out the windshield and got the shock of my life. Walking from my right to left, I saw what I can only describe as the bottom half of a woman in a long dress. I could see the dress billowing out with each step. I immediately thought of the way the woman in the movie Titanic looked walking. The apparition gave off a slightly bluish hue, kind of like the projections in Star Wars. Needless to say, I got scared shitless. For whatever reason, my first instinct was to turn every light my truck had on, including my overhead light bar. My second instinct was to drive clear across the parking lot on the other side of the park. I wound up sitting there the rest of the night, trying to debunk what I had seen. I wasn't able to come up with a valid reason for what I saw. That was one of the last nights I worked at that ranch overnight. Luckily for me, the city had installed a series of CCTV cameras all around the property that were monitored by an outside security company. For context, I've commonly had instances of deja vu and a strange intuition since I was a kid. Between feeling extreme nostalgia when visiting a place for the first time, to even having a gut feeling when my phone will ring, or someone knocking on the door minutes before it happens. However, the most common instances were times that I felt I was being watched by someone. I had the most extreme example of this take place in the house that I lived in during high school. We had a generally unpleasant hallway that was unlit and had several blind corners that would cause my family and I to run into each other on numerous occasions. However, it started to get real creepy when I would watch TV in the living room, and I noticed in my peripheral vision that somebody unrecognizable walked across the hallway entrance. Initially, I just passed it off, but then it became a reoccurring issue. However, once I got that familiar gut feeling of being watched, I took it more seriously. One night, I'm watching TV again, and this time I slowly see someone poking their head around one of the blind corners of the hallway entrance. Keeping my eyes on the TV, I try to focus on the shape in my peripheral until I can discern an older-looking bald man in a suit. Think Agent 47 crossed with the dude from the old Six Flags commercials. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept watching the TV, acting like I didn't see him. However, my mother, who was also in the living room with me, suddenly asked me if I'm all right and that I looked pale and wide-eyed. I tell her that I thought I saw somebody staring at me from the hallway, and she pauses and then quietly asks me, "Bald man in a suit?" Apparently, she had been noticing the same guy for a while as well, but thought it was just her imagination. What finally did it for both of us, however, was when my mother's boyfriend randomly asked us if we had seen a bald man in the hallway. Both my mother and I had avoided telling her boyfriend about this because he gets scared easily by any sort of spooky talk. So for the last year in the house, we kinda just accepted the man since nothing really happened other than occasionally being stared at. But in the last few months before moving, things started to get a bit more aggressive. From light switches being turned off repeatedly, my mother had to tape up a few light switches so that they couldn't be flicked off, to our dog kennel rattling when the dogs were actually with me in another room. These shenanigans didn't follow us once we moved houses, so I assumed we were just intruding on him. But this was definitely the most observable paranormal event that's occurred with me personally. From 3 years old to 10 years old, my family lived in a tiny second-floor walk-up apartment. It was long and narrow, and my family had to walk through my bedroom to get to the bathroom, so it was pretty cramped to say the least. When I turned 8, my parents decided to offer me a bit of privacy, asking me if I wanted to move into a separate room that had its own entrance and exit from the entry stairwell. It was very small, like a closet, but because it was private and away from my parents and baby brothers, I was eager to move in there. From the very first night I moved my bed in there, I saw a very dark, shadowy presence fading in and out of the wall. I thought I was going crazy. I never told another soul about it. I saw it nearly every night for 2 years. He was tall and thin and a living shadow. That's all I can do to describe him. I remember that my mother would sometimes come into that room to check on me, and I would be soaked through my pajamas in my own sweat from hiding under the blankets. I was petrified of that room. It was like being in hell, but I had no options left because my baby brothers slept in my old room. I was sleep deprived and unhealthy. It's been nearly 40 years since we moved out of that horrible apartment. We moved many miles away, and I've never been back since then. Last year, pre-COVID, I decided to make the long trek to my old neighborhood. I was walking around, and I ran into a familiar-looking elderly woman who was sweeping the sidewalk outside the building next door to my old apartment. I approached her and introduced myself. Shockingly, she remembered my parents, and even remembered me from when I was a young kid. Anyways, she told me that our old apartment had a terrible tragedy in it, in my old bedroom. About 20 years ago, a young man in his early 20s killed himself in that room while his parents were away on vacation. The neighbors eventually smelled a terrible odor and called the police. They found his dead body in my old bedroom. I went to a small private college in the Midwest. The school was founded in the mid-1800s and has a very prolific paranormal history. The story I will relate now happened to me in the mid-80s in my freshman year of college. The college I went to was situated around a large bowl, with the student center in the center, and all the dorms and classrooms on higher ground around the bowl. So when you're walking to any of the dorms or classrooms, you are walking up a hill and usually have a good view of the side of the building facing you. One night, around 10 p.m., I was walking back to my dorm room, and I had happened to look at my windows. I have 2 sets of double windows separated by about 5 feet. I saw a figure walking in front of the windows from right to left. I could half see the face. It was an adult male about 6 feet tall with long dark hair and a beard. It had a very Christ-like appearance. When I saw it, it was just passing from the right windows to behind the section of brick wall, and then it walked in front of the left windows. My first response was anger. Who the hell is in my room, I thought, as I ran up the hill to the dorm. My windows are on the 3rd floor and about in the center of the building. I raced upstairs and unlocked my door. The doors in our dorm will close on their own unless a heavy weight is put in front of them. They are also permanently locked. If you leave your room without your key, you're locked out and will have to pay an RA $5 to open your door. On entering my room, I looked around and nothing had been touched. Nothing seemed to be missing and my stash was still there. I ran downstairs to ask my best friend and former roommate if he had been in my room. He still had a key to the room. Judging by the state of undress of him and his girlfriend, he hadn't been out of his room recently. I ran back upstairs and pounded on my RA's door, waking him up. I demanded to know who had been let into my room and why. He had no idea what the hell I was talking about, and certainly hadn't let anyone in my room as he'd been asleep. So I went back to my room to check more carefully for anything out of place. It would have been impossible for someone to have walked past both of my left-hand windows, as my desk came out to the middle of the two windows. Anyone walking in front of the windows, past the windows, would have had to walk directly through my desk. I chalked it up to another harmless paranormal incident, and didn't really think much about it for a couple of years. One day, about 5 years later, I was getting ready for work, and while brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I happened to glance in the mirror. My blood ran cold and goosebumps broke out on my arms. The face that I was seeing in the mirror was the exact same face I had seen on the figure that walked across my room in college. My face. I was 5 years older and had shoulder-length hair and a beard. Many of my friends teased me because of my Christ-like appearance. It really freaked me out for a few minutes, but I don't think that it means anything. Just a thing that happened. I worked for a UN peacekeeping force when this happened. I was told to take some supplies to a medical area which wasn't being used at the time, but had been used to treat malaria. I put the supplies where I needed to, and was about to leave when I heard something that sounded like moaning from somewhere from the treatment area, followed by a, "Help me, please help me." I call out if anyone was there, and look down some of the corridors which were dark, as it was only the entrance that had any lighting. Nobody was there, so I go to leave again, thinking that it was my imagination, when I hear the sound of a portable medical bed move, followed by more moaning. I go back to look who was there, but nothing. That's when I saw the bed moving this time, right in front of me. It moved towards me and I started to say a prayer under my breath, and I got the courage to check the bed out. Nothing seemed off, and I went to leave again when it moved once more. This time, quite violently. I just quickly left after that. I thought about telling someone, but didn't because they may think I was an idiot. I returned to the area a few times after, but I never stayed long. The reason I'm writing this now, and not before, is because I was only reminded of this the other day. I was driving to the store with my son, and he wanted me to listen to a song. I don't even remember the words, I just remember that the tune brought me back to a place I had tucked away in my memory in hopes to be forgotten. Now I can't get that old lady's mouth out of my head. This happened in 1987. I'm sure about the date because of the Whittier earthquake. It just so happens that at that very moment I was painting a wall in the dining room a different color when it hit, and I ended up streaking paint across the wall as I ran over to hold our overly large fish tank from falling off the stupidly flimsy stand it was on. This took place in Hacienda Heights, California. My boyfriend at the time wasn't really welcome at my mother's house because she couldn't shake this bad feeling about him. So being young and dumb, I moved out of her house and into a place I found down the street with him. I wish I had listened to her. It was a small, one-bedroom bungalow. At first, we were getting along just fine, but it seemed like things changed as the months passed and we started fighting even more. I thought it was odd that I, Susie Homemaker, didn't even want to make that house a home. It was just a weird vibe about the place, and it got darker the longer we stayed there. As you walk in the partial glass front door, On the left, there were 2 white window pane doors on the built-in bookcase on both sides of a fireplace. Then the dining room, and in the back was the kitchen. The bedroom was on the right. We couldn't afford a bed frame, so our full-sized mattress was on the floor under the window, and that was the only thing in there besides the clock. There was an uneasiness in that bedroom that I couldn't put my finger on. I felt very depressed in there. Oh, little things happened throughout the house from the moment we moved in, but we just laughed it off until it was no longer funny. It seemed like when we were at odds with each other, it intensified in a dark way. Oftentimes, my boyfriend would just leave and I was alone, sometimes for days, and I thought that he did it on purpose because he knew I was scared to be there alone. At first I was fine, not scared of anything, until one of those nights I was sleeping. I was jolted up by an extremely loud bang that left my ears ringing. I jumped up and at first looked out the front window, thinking it was something outside, but the streets were still. I checked the house, but there was nothing out of place. The next night it happened again louder than before, only this time I glanced at the clock before checking the house, and it was 5 o'clock in the morning, on the dot, and my room was freezing. I tried to go back to sleep, but I heard muffled wails of a woman. I literally had to lift my head from the pillow to listen, but no one was around. The next day, my boyfriend came home, and with a few words and some hand-picked flowers, all was stupidly forgiven. I told him what had happened, but he shrugged it off, telling me that it could have been a backfire or the pipes, and I bought it. One early evening after dinner, we were going to watch TV on the couch in the living room, and I excused myself to go to the bathroom. I kept hearing him yelling out things at me, but I couldn't really make out what he was saying. I opened up the door and looked at him like, "What?" And he turned white, crawling backwards on the couch with his eyes big, then leaped up and ran into the kitchen looking around and checking the back door. He came out saying that the door was locked from the inside. After he calmed down and I could understand him, he told me that he was talking to me in the kitchen. He asked me why I put a granny house dress on and was asking for snacks, and he was getting a bit upset that I didn't answer him. I had no answers. There had been a few times we both saw what looked like a teenage boy sitting on the front stoop, sometimes holding his head in his hands. But when we approached him, it was like he was never there. I would often point out faces in the glass panes of the bookcase that looked like they were talking to us while we were watching TV. They were just reflections of something that wasn't in the room, with their features outlined by the flickering light from the TV. But after a while, the faces became more defined. In the beginning, my boyfriend thought I was making it up until he saw it for himself. We would hear banging on the bathroom door, like with someone's fist, even when we weren't in there, and an older guy's voice saying, "Ah, come on," sending us running outside a couple of times, then feeling stupid sitting outside, so we went in and stayed spooked for the rest of the day. I called the landlord to ask him if something happened there, or can he make it stop? But before I could even open my mouth, he was asking me if I was calling to complain about something he had no control over. In the background, I heard his wife say, "Is that the young couple? They want to move, do they? There goes another one." He sounded like this had happened a lot to them before, so that really got my blood boiling. Why would they rent this place to us without even a heads up? Realizing that they would be of no immediate help, I just hung up. I couldn't move, I had no money, and my mother for sure wouldn't let me move back in as long as I was with him. We lived there for at least 4 months when our relationship started spinning out of control. He was being forceful, demanding, and drinking a lot more. One night he asked me to pick him up, so I did, and somehow I ended up with a broken arm because I didn't want him to drive my car drunk. I had to beg him to shift gears so I could drive to the ER, because he was tired, and after the hospital, I was exhausted. I just wanted to sleep, so I went to the bedroom while he opted to lay on the couch and watch TV. The next thing I know, he's grabbing his stuff, saying that he's not staying there anymore, and walked out, leaving me there by myself with a broken arm. Wow. I remember that it was a warm night, but it was raining, so I laid on the couch with only the screen door closed so I could hear the rain. The lights went out, freaking me out even more, so I put candles on the coffee table and one on the bookcase and sat back down on the couch. I was too scared to sleep in the bedroom. I sat there and saw those faces. One was an old lady. She was frowning and her mouth was moving like she was trying to over-enunciate to tell me something or yell at me. Her face got bigger and smaller, like she was coming closer to the glass and then backing away. She kept waving her finger at me. Her gray hair was straight and put back with a headband. Her mouth was just going on, opening and closing, and the candlelight glistened off her bottom teeth. Her teeth looked a little, I don't know, long and old, if that makes any sense. Then there was a middle-aged man who didn't look directly at me. He looked aggravated, but not at me, more like at everything and everyone. And then a crying teenager. His face was so full of despair. I could make out the words, please, and no, no, no. And then he put his hand on his face. Looking at him brought tears to my eyes, and my heart felt so very heavy. It dawned on me that this was the kid on our doorstep. I must have sat there for hours with the blankets up to my nose until the lights came on and I fell asleep. The next morning, I walked down to the corner store and called my mother, who was happy to find out that I was ready to come home. Before I handed over the keys, my mother had some words with the landlord. He told her that he had had the place blessed before I moved in, and he was hoping that it had worked. He also told Mom that he bought the place already haunted. All he knew from digging was that it was 2 bungalows together, but one burnt down. The one I was renting was the one where an old lady lived whose grown son came on hard times because he was an alcoholic. He lost his wife and couldn't keep a job, so he and his teenage son moved into her place with her. His son was so unstable that he found a gun in the house and shot himself in the bedroom, and his grandmother died from a heart attack not long after. He didn't know what happened to the man. Talk about a roundabout. I don't know why that tune, or maybe the light reflecting off the rain on my windshield, made me think about that old lady's mouth, but it did. Now I understand a little more as to why I don't like reflective things in my home. I've been working at this clinic for 6 years now. I've always felt like there was something weird going on, like an eerie feeling. Little manifestations would happen here and there, like doors opening and closing, hearing footsteps and things randomly falling. Nothing too major to be afraid of, honestly. About 3 weeks ago, as I was saying goodbye to my coworkers, I saw a brown silhouette, toddler-sized, run across one of the rooms. At that instance, I felt like time froze and my body turned cold, and I was in denial of what I had just seen. I tried to negate the situation and snapped out of it, but as I turned to leave, one of my coworkers was staring at me with a pale, cold look and asked me, "Did you see that?" I replied, "See what?" She said, "That brown thing that ran across the room." At that moment, my body felt weak and goosebumps invaded my skin. I admitted to her that I had seen it as well. The following day in the lab, one of the lights started to flicker, which is very unusual, but I didn't pay any mind to it. Another coworker said, "That's unusual," and I said, "Maybe it's that little ghost." She got serious and said, "Don't play with that stuff." Me, being a jokester, said out loud, "If something or someone is here and you want to let your presence be known, move something or show yourself again." My coworkers got pissed at me, but we went on about our day. I started my vacation, and the next day, My co-workers start massive nonstop texting me that they walked into the clinic with 2 portraits on the floor, something that's never happened. They were so scared. I told them it was probably nothing. Then the next day again, other portraits were found on the floor. They kept telling me that they would continually smell a weird odor that kept shifting from locations, and our clinic is immaculate. They even called some cleaners to come and clean the place. The cleaners even told them there was nothing to clean. The clinic was very well organized, but the cleaners couldn't smell anything. I'll be heading back to work on Thursday and see what happens.